Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Book Trek 2023, the Summer of Trek. This is a BookTube event, which, as you can tell from the title, is all about Star Trek. It's all about Star Trek fiction, Star Trek novels, maybe the Star Trek shows, maybe the Star Trek movies. It's shepherded by Vin at Revenant Reads with a bridge crew of other great channels, and the idea for the Summer of Trek is much looser than the two previous iterations of Book Trek, which is just to read Star Trek. You don't have to restrict yourself to a particular series or a particular time period or anything like that. Just read Star Trek all summer long. Summer is made for it. Not this particular summer so far. It's autumn here in New England. Here in Boston, it's autumn. And it has been pretty much, with one day's exception, it pretty much has been for all of June. I can hope that way down the line, I've looked at the forecast, I don't think we're going to get summer anytime soon, but I can hope way down the line that we get sultry days where the nights are still warm and the plants are blooming at night and you need a little electric fan to cool things off a little, or the ceiling fan, where the days, the midday, like from noon to 3, is decidedly hot. I was kind of hoping for a couple of those, or at least a hint of them by now, but no, no, not at all. It is still sweatshirt weather, and it is still 2 blankets at night weather. But anyway, enough about the weather. I can do that on my own. So I am just picking Star Trek books at random. I have only a handful, for the first time in my life, I have only a handful of Star Trek paper books here. But I have well over 300 of them as ebooks. I have every Star Trek book ever written as an ebook. And I chose one today that I don't think I've ever read. I think I would remember it. It's a standalone novel from the original series, but it's late in the... It's not, the 1990s or whatever for the original series. It's much later than that. It's by Greg Cox, who's a Star Trek writer, a science fiction writer that I don't like at all. I usually find him very boring, just very right by the numbers, so that I know what's coming. I don't like how any of it's being done. I'm not being challenged or made to think or applaud at any time. But I thought I'd give it a try anyway. I don't think I've ever read this. It's called No Time Like the Past. So it has a dumb title, which I kind of associate with Greg Cox, and I was expecting the worst. As you can see from the cover right away tells you the sort of elevator pitch of this whole thing, that's Jim Kirk. And it's a young Jim Kirk in the tunic of his first 5-year mission. The first 5-year mission of the Enterprise. But that's also Seven of Nine with him. Also in her distinctive costume from Voyager, from Star Trek Voyager. Which is 100 years in the future from that Jim Kirk. So right away you've got that storyline, and that turns out to be the case. That is what happens in this book. The crew of Voyager, they are stranded in the Delta Quadrant. They are trying to get back home, 70,000 light years from home. And they're exploring a planet, and they come across the last thing they would ever expect in the Delta Quadrant. Almost the last thing. All right, maybe not a Dodge pickup truck, but they encounter one of the last things they would ever expect. In a cavern, on a planet, they encounter a carved likeness of James T. Kirk. And they actually speculate, Janeway and Tuvok and Seven of Nine, they actually speculate, well, didn't Kirk wasn't he lost while trying to save a planet trying to save the Enterprise from a weird energy anomaly? And wasn't it theorized that energy anomaly popped in and out of subspace all over the galaxy? Is it possible that behind this carved edifice of Jim Kirk is the final resting place of the greatest captain in Starfleet history? Is it possible that ribbon of energy brought him here? And they don't know. But one thing that Seven of Nine notices that they don't notice, her ocular implants from when she was a Borg, are able to register all sorts of things that human eyes are not. So we don't know if maybe Geordi LaForge will also have been able to detect this. She detects chronoton radiation. She detects the charged particles that are associated with time travel in the Star Trek universe. And quick as you can say MacGuffin, that carved edifice transports her 100 years back in time, and 3 quadrants over to the Alpha Quadrant, to the original crew. Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and a strapping blonde security girl and an ambassador have gone to a planet because the natives of that planet have been rather too hospitable with Orion pirates. And Kirk's mission, that ambassador's mission, is to talk them into not doing that. We can offer you improved relationships with the Federation if you will stop harboring Orion pirates, stop helping them. And they're in the middle of that conference when it's interrupted by disruptor fire. The violence erupts at the conference. The main representative of the native people is killed right in front of Kirk, and minutes later, that strapping security woman is also killed. She's vaporized by one of these disruptor weapons. Kirk and the ambassador retreat and are only saved really by the arrival of this mysterious blonde woman who has a better phaser than Kirk's. He can't help but immediately notice that. There are 2 things he notices. One is her phaser, and one is her looks. Yeah, this is young Jim Kirk, the greatest womanizer in the galaxy. He notices that she's extremely attractive. And they beat a retreat. They are able to escape the interference that stopped the Enterprise from helping them in the first place and get back on board Kirk's Enterprise. NCC 1701. No bloody A, B, C, or D. Just the original Starship Enterprise. The greatest of them. Not the original, obviously, since that's now Jonathan Archer's ship. But the first Constitution-class starship. The first Constitution-class Enterprise. Despite a scene in Star Trek Picard that bothers me. There are a few things in Star Trek Picard that bother me, not many. And one of them really bothers me when there's a great scene where 7 of 9 is showing Jean-Luc Picard's son an array of different starships to see if he can identify them or to get his thoughts on them. And she shows him a Roddenberry-era Constitution-class starship, and it's not the Enterprise. And when she does show the Enterprise, it's the refitted Enterprise from the movies. And it's that Enterprise that young Jack Picard looks at and says, my personal favorite, Kirk's Enterprise. And every old school fan who was watching that moment was saying, no, no. The old one, the previous one that you showed, made from a model from the Roddenberry set with the twirling lights in the front of the engine nacelles, that's Kirk's Enterprise, not this thing. But nevertheless, 7 of 9 is keenly aware of the possibility of time disruptions, of time anomaly. She doesn't want to cause any problems to the time stream, especially since, as she thinks in her mind, Kirk is crucial to so many major events, from the negotiations with the Klingons at Camp Kittimer to the V'ger incident, and plenty of others that she maybe doesn't know about. She knows that she doesn't want to disrupt the time stream, and she's constantly invoking the temporal time directive, the temporal prime directive. Which was a little bit odd. I mean, this was really good. I shouldn't bury the lead. Greg Cox surprised me. This was a really enjoyable book to read. 7 of 9 keeps invoking the temporal prime directive. I kept waiting for somebody, Spock or McCoy or somebody, to say, what the hell is that? They don't ever do it. But she wants to figure out what's going on. She wants to figure out how she got back in time. She assumes it has something to do with the artifact that was part of Kirk's carved face. But she realizes that she only has one part of that artifact and that other parts must be scattered elsewhere in the time stream. Elsewhere in this part of the time stream. This is where the fragment that she does have brought her. Where are all the others? And collect them all. That sort of thing. She convinces Kirk and Spock and McCoy and whatnot to go looking for those pieces in the past. She assures them that it is incredibly important. She calls herself Annika 7 and refuses to tell them anything about herself, which is pretty odd. It's pretty odd that Kirk and his crew would agree to as much as they agree to. At the very least, if she's an obvious cyborg, at the very least, McCoy would insist on examining her. And he doesn't. She refuses. Also, the Enterprise has sensors. They have internal sensors. The Enterprise does. They could turn those internal sensors on her. And notice, not only Borg technology, which I assume Kirk would know about Borg technology because Jonathan Archer encountered Borg technology, but also they would encounter her comm badge. So you can see it there. If you'll only pay attention to her comm badge is Starfleet issue. And it's only 100 years in the future, so a lot of the engineering designs would be the same. Scotty would be able to reverse engineer this thing and figure out a lot. I was a little bit disappointed in how easily Kirk decides to just completely trust her. Also, her comm badge, not to get all too nitpicky on you here, but that's important to this book, as I'll get to. Her comm badge is in the shape of the Federation symbol. That kind of triangular symbol that is the sigil for Starfleet. It's the sigil for Starfleet. Everything with Starfleet looks like that, but not in Kirk's time. In Kirk's time, that was the symbol for the Enterprise alone. You might remember from the original show that other crews of other vessels have different things on their chest lapel. They have different emblems. It seems like there's one for every ship. And maybe some point in the future, the Federation decides to honor the Enterprise by making them all uniform. But at this time, surely Kirk would look at that thing and think, why are you wearing that? Were you or are you going to be a member of my crew? It'd be the natural thing for him to think. But instead, he agrees to go on this hunt for these scattered MacGuffins, and the hunt takes the Enterprise. If I can't hear my own words, then I assume I have to stop. I will ignore the background noise most of the time, but if I can't hear myself speak, then I'm assuming you can hear the noise. So, but anyway, where was I before the Indy 500? Oh, right. The thing, I loved this book, but the reason why I loved it is the reason why I think it might be an actual failure as a Star Trek novel, because I don't know how much you would get out of this if you didn't know Star Trek backwards and forwards, and I don't just mean the original series. I mean Voyager. I mean large chunks of Deep Space Nine, even some bits of The Next Generation, but especially the original series. All of the parts of this time-spanning MacGuffin that 7 of 9 has them looking for, all those parts are on different planets from the original series. And it's wonderful. The way Greg Cox does it is wonderful. It's like you've stepped right off that series, whatever episode it was, to the conclusion to some storyline. What happens to the people in this episode or that episode? The episode Let That Be Your Last Battlefield, for instance. What happened to that planet that everybody killed themselves except for these two people? And so on and so forth, all throughout the book. And I guess Greg Cox probably thinks that he is Johnny on the spot with contextualizing those, but he doesn't do a very good job of it. If you didn't know what he was talking about, you wouldn't know what he was talking about for pretty much anything in here. Now, I've mentioned before, I don't know that, have any of my other co-hosts made a video yet for Book Trek? I don't know that they have. But anyway, if I weren't accustomed to carrying on boring monologues with myself, I wouldn't be an old coot, now would I? But I have mentioned the ins and outs of pastiche fiction. All Star Trek novels are pastiche fiction because they are writing about a universe they didn't create and that maybe exists in a different medium. So they're all pastiche fiction. I've mentioned before that one of the dances that you have to do with pastiche fiction is making it comprehensible to people who don't already get it, for people who aren't involved. It's what hampers 99.9% of all Star Trek fiction that we'll be reading all summer long. 99.9% of it is hampered by the fact that someone who didn't know anything about Star Trek would not understand it at all. It would be ancient Sanskrit to them. It's only a handful of Star Trek novels that you could actually hand to someone who doesn't know anything about the show and have it work. And that's a fault of the novels. That's a fault of pastiche fiction just in general if it makes you feel like you are excluded. That's the difference, for instance, between a really good Sherlock Holmes pastiche and a really bad one. Or anything else for that matter. You can go through, as I often do, the endless offerings on fanfiction.net. You can tell in the first 10 paragraphs of any story on fanfiction.net whether or not the writer of the pastiche gets it, whether or not they get that fact. And so many of them don't. Oh my God. Oh my God. But you never know if you were roaming around on fanfiction.net and you found a story that worked really well. I don't know. You might have hit someone who writes fan fiction fairly well. Of course, where would you look for such a thing? Anywhere in the wilds of fanfiction.net. Was there a Tarzan TV show? Well, maybe. Starring Travis Fimmel. You will know from Vikings. I don't know. It could be anything, really. The million Legion of Superhero stories on there. But you know what I mean. I'm sure you encountered it yourself. It's a tricky thing for Star Trek fans because we are the ones who will lose sight of that. Because we do get the references. And the more of a Star Trek geek you are, the more of the references you'll get. I got all of them in this book. All of them and then some. And the only reason I'm bringing it up, it's like I say, it's an endemic problem with pastiche fiction just in general. The reason I'm bringing it up for a No Time Like the Past is that this is suffused with it. On every page, practically every paragraph. Once Seven of Nine meets Kirk, those kinds of, what do you call them? Easter eggs? Shout-outs? Whatever you call them. They're everywhere in this book. Everywhere. And they are not contextualized. I lost count of how many times in this book. Once the subject of time travel comes up, I lost track of how many times Kirk pensively thinks to himself the word Edith. It's never explained. Never. Star Trek fans will know what he's referring to, and they'll know who he's referring to. A newcomer will have no idea. They'll be flipping pages saying, did I miss an Edith somewhere along? So, I don't know what to say about No Time Like the Past. I think a Star Trek fan would absolutely love this thing. I loved it. It never slows down. It's terrific in that regard. I think the characterization of Spock and McCoy is a little bit lazy. The characterization of Kirk is really good. And believe it or not, in original series Star Trek, that's often the weakest link. But as to someone who's just trying Star Trek fiction for the first time, maybe knows a little bit about the show, maybe you've seen the movie with the whales. For a long time, that was a Star Trek newbie who knew nothing. They had seen the one with the whales. Maybe if you know that, I don't know what you'd make of this thing. Not at all. But it intrigued me. It really did, for one main reason. A lot of these later Star Trek novels, before Pocket Books just sort of gave up on the franchise, this was after Next Generation had gone off the air, Deep Space Nine and Voyager went off the air, Star Trek Enterprise was canceled. These things dried up. And a lot of I would say probably the last 2 years of Star Trek novels, I wasn't paying much attention at all. And that's from when this came out, despite the original design. This came out then, very late. So I might try a few of those. I'm not imposing much of a plan on my Trek reading. I'm just sort of spinning the wheel. But tonight I might pick another one of those later books and see what I make of it. No idea. Might not. I'm going to decide all of this in what? I don't even know what time it is right now, but it'll be 15 hours before I decide. And I'll pick something, and I will gas on about it tomorrow. So I will wrap this up for now, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.